Yo, what's up, y'all? This is the Masked Warrior Investigates, back at it again with another video. I got some news today. A while back I did a video on SCP, what was it called? I can't remember what the number was, but I remember what everybody called it. It was called Containing Bismarck. We reached over 300 views on that first video. I want to thank you so much for your support. You guys have been awesome. And yes, I'm still recording on my phone. Got a new pack 38. It's about time too, because they were running late on their shipment and whatnot. I'm not sponsored by them, I'm just giving them a shout out. But today, we are reacting to SCP, exploring the SCP Foundation, Lord Blackwood, and the Land of the Uncleen. I remember watching this a while back, like when it first came out. But I haven't reacted to this in like a while. Oh man, I mean like a long, long while. So, let's get into the video. Oh, and also, before we get started, 38 specials make nice blunts. That's just saying.
Lord Blackwood in the Land of the Unclean. The SCP universe is so often focused on horror, nightmarish anomalies, and things that lurk in the night, but there is a scattering of practically every other genre of fiction as well. Today, rather than looking at an anomaly through the lens of horror,
I'm sorry guys, I gotta pause. I gotta take care of something real quick. I'll be right back. Come on. Alright, I'm back. Sorry guys, I got busy. I had to grab a cup of coffee. I know it has a straw in it, and I know this might look ridiculous, but I can't risk throwing my face right now. So, may look a little ridiculous, but I don't really care. Let's continue.
we'll be looking at it through one of adventure. This video will be different than normal, as I'll be simply reading a tale verbatim. But I first want to give a short summary on the titular star of the tale, Lord Blackwood. Lord Blackwood is currently contained by the Foundation as SCP-1867. He's contained because he's an intelligent sea slug capable of telepathic communication, who insists that he is a British explorer and naturalist by the full name of Lord Theodore Thomas Blackwood. Blackwood is friendly and cooperative, and displays remarkable knowledge relating to geography, zoology.
I'm sorry I am pausing a lot in this one, guys, but I wanted to mention something real quick. I'm actually writing a tale on SCP-049, which is the Plague Doctor. It's going to be based in one of his journals, so you know, just through 1911 into 1941. And since they don't give specific dates on when 049 was captured, I'm probably gonna set the scene probably, I don't know, right before, and I'm just starting off writing it, like, I've just started writing it like a few weeks ago. I got about 4, I guess you can call them chapters, but they're like you keep them like in a journal and whatnot. But I don't know if it'll be the best thing in the world. Like I said, it's gonna be my first time writing anything SCP related. But by the time I'm done with it, I'll let you guys know. Alright. And I will be re-uploading a SCP-049 video in the future that's more advertiser friendly or whatever, even though I don't use ads. As YouTube got on my ass and whatnot on smoking weed on YouTube and whatnot. It's just stupid. It's just fucking stupid. And I'm gonna get it started on getting like commercials in and whatnot. Anyways, let's continue.
Botany, archaeology, anthropology, linguistics, obscure mythology, mysticism, and cryptozoology. He has discussed at length his previous exploits, including service in the Second Opium War, expeditions to remote regions of the world, and encounters with various rare creatures and peoples. He does not, however, seem to realize any events or information dating after 1910, possibly through willful ignorance. A collection of items was recovered from an underground vault beneath a cottage owned by a woman who claimed she was keeping it for Lord Blackwood. The vault included thousands of objects, many of them completely unknown to the Foundation, including plants, animals, fossils, artifacts, handwritten journals, strange firearms, globes of various planets, a heavily modified carriage, and something that managed to kill 4 agents upon activation before being destroyed. In an interview with Blackwood, when asked about the veracity of his claims, he says that he would never fake his work, as it's against the heart of being a naturalist, remarking that the Foundation seems to be missing the explorer's spirit. When the interviewer asks if he knows that he's a sea slug, Blackwood acts astonished, saying that if he can't bother to be sensible, then he has no reason to speak with him.
That's funny.
The tale we'll be looking at seems to come from one of Blackwood's journals, and details his expedition into the land of the uncleen, which is the alternate dimension from SCP-093. Go ahead and pretend this is all being read with an English accent. December 25th, 1875. As far and as wide as I have traveled in my years, there is nothing in the world quite like Christmas time in London. The crisp winter air echoes with...
Hang on, I'm just checking on the length of the video. This is gonna be a long one, guys.
the song of carolers, and everywhere one looks, the eyes of his fellow men are filled with an air of peace and charity. I gave the help the day off after our early meal, and have spent the evening in quiet reflection and planning. For this Christmas, the germ of a grand and glorious new expedition has presented itself to me. 2 nights ago, I attended a Christmas party at the Gentlemen's Club. The food was fine, and the drinks flowed freely, and I remained in conversation with several of my fellow naturalists till well into the morning. Shortly after midnight, our discussion turned to the topic of the supernatural, and Mr. Wallace, the famed father of evolutionary theory and a noted spiritualist, told me of a most unusual occurrence he had heard of recently. An associate of his had recently returned from the Levant with a most unusual artifact, a small red disc, fashioned perhaps of cinnabar, carved with runes he thought to be an early form.
Also, up next is SCP-093 after this. I'm trying to do these in order as best I can and whatnot. Let's continue.
Form of Phoenician, or perhaps Cretan. When left to its own devices, the object would roll about on its own and reach great speeds, breaking through walls and crushing anything in its path, until it came to rest upon a mirrored surface. A man could pick it up easily, no matter how fast it moved, he claimed, and until it was set down, it would glow brightly in strange colors. We found this account most curious, but what Mr. Wallace told us next proved even more interesting. 2 months ago, he said, his associate's maid had been cleaning in the room where the disc laid pressed against one of his dressing mirrors. Ignorant of the object's nature, the maid lifted it up to dust underneath it and set it back upon the mirror, whereupon the maid had said the mirror's surface rippled and a man in strange clothes fell through, as if he had been leaning upon a wall that gave way. The man panicked and began flailing about and shouting nonsensically, and tried to flee before the maid locked him in the room and summoned the police, who took the man away as he shouted and tried to run back in the direction of the room he had apparated in. Mr. Wallace's associate had thought him at first a common thief, but there was absolutely no way the man could have entered the estate without arousing suspicion, and the maid's account was most clear. He had come through the mirror. I have long wondered if there were other worlds in creation where man, or beings like man, have existed and thrived. But owing to the great vastness of space, I have long assumed that none of them would be within our reach for some time. If Mr. Wallace's account was true, there might be a way to travel to one of those worlds right here in London. I entreated with Mr. Wallace for some time to divulge the name of his confederate. He refused, out of respect for his friend's privacy, but told me that the strange intruder, who claimed the name Ezekiah Belson, had been declared mad by the court and sentenced to Bedlam, and that I might find him there if I wished to. After New Year's, I intend to call upon this madman.
Very interesting so far. I might have to do this in 2 parts, because I got a lot of shit to do today. Yeah, it's just gonna be a long day, guys. I mean, I literally just woke up like an hour ago. So, if this cuts off like halfway or whatever, I'm sorry. But that's just the way it goes. Let's continue.
January 3rd, 1876. The fact that an institution like Bedlam is allowed to exist in our great nation is an affront. Were a man not already mad upon entering these walls, the circumstances of his internment would make him so. I did my best to avert my eyes from the lunatics packed into dingy cells and overcrowded wards, as a porter led me to a padded cell where the man called Ezekiah Belson had been locked away alone. None of the doctors had been able to speak to him, she said. If I wished to try, I was more than welcome to do so. A gruff-looking jailer with a large and ancient-looking keyring unlocked the door, and I invited myself inside, where Mr. Belson sat alone in the corner. I introduced myself and said I had come to learn what I could.
Hang on. I'll be right back. Ay. Ay, son of a bitch. Sorry, guys. I'm sorry I'm keep pausing this thing. It's just quarantine has me freaking cooped up here, and I don't like being cooped up in my house. I like being out in the open and whatnot. Let's continue.
Of who he was and where he came from. He did not respond at first and turned his head away, mumbling under his breath. I listened carefully and found that the tongue he spoke almost resembled the English language, but it was far from any tongue that has ever been spoken in the Queen's court, twisted and altered as if by centuries of deviation, not dissimilar from how the many and various Romance languages evolved amidst the collapse of the Roman Empire. I stood and listened attentively as he repeated a series of sentences 3 times that I present below. Hey who are between space, pressed is your vos. Ye are watchin' in I year vissel, here and there. Away wit me sin vader, in shed for me yeer sanger weapon, and I'll but do the word of the vaders below ye, spite. The man's accent was strange, and it was partway through his 3rd recitation when it occurred to me that he was attempting to pray. I knew the prayer well, and when he finished his 3rd recitation, I repeated it back to him in the Queen's English. He fell silent as he heard my rendition. His first reaction was more vitriolic than I expected. I believe he accused me of having the speech of the old elders, and accused me of being a sinner or a witch. I assured him as best I could that I was neither. I am a naturalist. He seemed to calm himself somewhat when he heard that word. In any event, he no longer feared me, and over the course of an hour or two we worked out a pidgin of English and his dialect in which we could converse. In time, I came to the conclusion that he hails from a world which is surprisingly like and yet completely alien to our own. Mr. Belson claimed to have come from a place called the city where Elijah fell. He describes it as a metropolis that would put London to shame. Tens of millions of souls call it home, living in towers thousands of feet high, commuting on great trains and horseless carriages that moved hundreds of miles per hour through the packed streets. Every building was wired with electricity and possessed devices for receiving of sights and sounds from the other end of the world, for delivering the contained knowledge of entire libraries and other incredible wonders. I showed him a map of the world and asked where this city lay, and he pointed to America, on the western coast of the Floridian Peninsula. He claimed he had been at work in one of the city's great towers, momentarily leaning against a wall during a prayer break, when the walls seemed to fall away behind him, and he found himself in a strange old house with a strangely dressed woman screaming at him, confirming Mr. Wallace's account. I showed him a Bible I procured from one of the doctors and asked if he was a Christian. He recoiled at the proposition, as he had when I recited the Lord's Prayer, and informed me that, while the elders had been Christians in days gone by, all of that had changed with the Second Coming and the authoring of the Third Testament, and that to openly proclaim to be a Christian was a heresy and a most heinous crime. I gather that in the nation Mr. Belson hails from, which he claims to control the entire world, the church and the state have been brought together in a way that would make the Archbishop of Canterbury himself a proponent of disestablishmentarianism. I asked what becomes of heretics when they are caught, and he informed me that they are made pure in tears. For if heresy is allowed to spread unchecked, then the unclean shall come and bring destruction to the pure and the wicked alike. Mr. Belson refused to elaborate further when I asked him what the unclean were.
Give me a minute. Damn it. Ugh, I hate... Sorry, guys. You know those sneezes? You know that feeling where you're about to sneeze, but you don't, and it all hurts up in your nostrils? That just happened to me. That just... Ugh, I hate when that happens. Let's continue. Sorry, I'm just... Yeah.
He asserted that it was blasphemy to even speak of them, for to say their name might draw their attention. I assured him that nobody in London would harm him for speaking of this matter, and that, whatever an unclean might be, there were none in any corner of this world that I have explored. Belson was visibly frightened as he told me, in halting whispers, that the unclean were the devil. But unlike the devil of the heretics, who lived in the pits below, these devils walked the earth. They were giant creatures, behemoths of pure sin, all of man's unrighteous thoughts and deeds given flesh. They stalked the darkest corners of the world, and their sin tainted the earth itself, so that no crop could grow, and no man could live. And it took all the efforts of the holiest crusaders to keep them so imprisoned, lest they break free, and the world come to an end. Until such time as the doctor assured me I must leave for the night, I remained in Belson's cell and learned as much as I could of the strange world he came from. Matters of language, culture, fashion, everything a man might need to know to travel amongst its gleaming cities anonymously. I managed to cajole a young nurse at the clerk's desk into letting me review Belson's file, and I learned that the affray that led to his arrest occurred in Notting Hill, at the residence of a Mr. Weathers. Tomorrow, I shall call upon him and state my intent to purchase this disc that turns mirrors into gateways to another world. For I intend to conduct a survey of this civilization to rival Sir Burton's forbidden journey into Mecca, and if I can, find one of these diabolical monsters Mr. Belson speaks of, and make it my prey. January 9th, 1876. Mr. Weathers was quite relieved to be rid of the disc when I purchased it from him. It glowed an eerie purple as he handed it to me, and yet once in my own hand, its aura seemed to fade and become instead a greenish hue. I took it home and placed it on a mirror in my study, and immediately the glass seemed to become as water. I saw a pastoral scene not unlike that which one might behold in our own countryside. A farmhouse in the distance, tilled fields with tall crops between. There were children running and playing among the crops, and in the distance, over the horizon, I saw in silhouette titanic structures taller than any building man on this earth has ever made. For several days I observed through the mirror. On a few occasions, the farmer and his hands came close enough that I could hear their speech. The accent not as thick as Mr. Belson's had been, but foreign enough that I strained to decipher their conversations. The clothes they wore were not unlike those a farmhand might wear in England, but Mr. Belson had warned me the fashions in the city were very different from what he had seen in London, and I would be most out of place in any of my usual clothes. A visit to the Metropolitan Police, and after a lengthy conversation with the precinct constable and the promise of a sizable donation, I was able to acquire the clothes Mr. Belson had been wearing at the time he entered our world. It was not dissimilar to morning dress, but to my eye it seemed less formal. There was no waistcoat. The jacket was shorter and cut more conservatively, with broad lapels. The cravat was thin and a solid shade of black. I had Deeds tailor it to fit me, and I stowed it away for when I reached the city. I have packed lightly, for I shall be traveling alone, and I shall have none of the native currency, for Mr. Belson had carried no billfold when he entered our world. I have my clothes and rations for a few days, and I shall enter dressed in a farmer's garb, and remain so dressed until I reach the metropolis.
Okay, I'm gonna pause it here. That car, I believe, in this scene right here, there is I believe it's a Hudson, probably early 40s, late 50s era. Very interesting thing, though. This file is very interesting. I just want to point that out. I just wanted to point the car out because I'm a big fan of classic cars and whatnot. I've mentioned this in a previous video, but I own a 66 Wagoneer. And I'm currently working on it. And it needs new brakes, I believe, and it's just being a bitch and a half to find, like, brake parts for it, because they're like the old school drum brakes and whatnot. And it's just a bitch and a half finding brake parts for it. So I'm probably just going to swap it over to the rear brakes over to disc brakes for now. And later on in life, I'm going to swap over the front brakes as well to disc brakes. Just wanted to point that out. Let's continue.
Gold and silver I have brought in the hopes of trading for currency, Mr. Belson having informed me that the principal form of trade is paper. And within my pack I have hidden my pistol and several of Mr. Moth's weapons. I have my compass, my sextant, my electric torch, a comprehensive atlas of the world, and my journal, and a few good luck talismans besides those. The cycle of day and night in this other world is some 8 hours behind our own. From this I deduce that the scene I behold is somewhere along the western coast of America. I shall cross through the looking-glass under cover of night this evening, for fear of alarming the farmers of my presence, and make my way towards the city, where hopefully I can discover a library or an institute of learning, and document the history and culture of this world, and where the so-called unfertile zones are located, so that I might observe these unclean for myself. January 10th, 1876. What a world this is indeed. This is indeed one of the more temperate parts of the world, for though it was past midnight local time when I entered this world, the air was perfectly warm. Based on my reading of the stars, I judge myself to be somewhere near the 34th parallel, in the region that must be in this world correspond to the land of California. Here in the fields it is dark, but in the southeast I behold a stunning panorama of light shining into the darkness. The aura of the great metropolis bathed in electric light, so bright that it shrouds the stars themselves above it. In the distance I heard sounds like great engines. The terrain was easily passed, even in the darkness, save for a fence at the edge of the farm I had alighted into, which I was forced to climb. The sight I beheld when I reached the source of the noise was unbelievable. A great paved road lay stretched across the grassland, solid barriers at either side. It was wider than any road I have ever beheld, and stripes painted on the road indicated 16 lanes for traffic, 8 going in one direction and 8 in the other. The entire road was lit by giant lamps, brighter than the gas lamps of London or New York, and one could have read a newspaper comfortably by their light. Even at this late hour, I watched in surprise and wonder, and no small amount of terror, I must admit, as motor carriages far more advanced than Mr. Bowley's steam cars hurtled along the road at speeds faster than the finest locomotive or the fastest racehorse. They must have been traveling 100 miles per hour or more, some of them small enough to carry a handful of people, others massive like train cars and looking to haul cargo by the ton. Some never touched the roadway at all, seemingly gliding on a cushion of air. I had to sit by the roadside, obscured in shadow, for some time while I took this in. Many times in my life I have encountered savage tribes that never before have seen the wonders of civilization. At this moment, I felt the savage myself, beholding wonders he has no hope of contemplating. I dared not cross the road, and as it seemed like a straightaway enough path to the city, I walked for several hours along its shoulder. It was difficult to tell in the darkness, but it looked to be about 30 miles to the outskirts of the city, and I judged it would take well past midday to reach the inhabited areas. I feared that any of the carriages hurtling by might at any moment careen out of control, and catastrophe would ensue, and I wondered how any man could bear such speeds. The eastern sky was beginning to show the tint of dawn when one of the carriages slowed to a stop on the edge of the road, next to me. A door opened, and a voice from within asked if I desired a ride into the city. I have never been one to rely on the charity of strangers, but I was curious to examine one of the carriages from the inside, and accepted. It was scarcely a quarter hour before we were among the crystalline towers of the metropolis. I did my best to disguise my terror as the driver, who identified himself as Ben O. Kazem, inquired of my business. I told him my name was Theodore Swarzrod. That, Mr. Belson had told me, being how my name would be presented in his language. That I was a farmhand in the nearby countryside, and that I had never before been to the city, but that I intended to research my family's history at one of the major libraries therein. We struggled to understand.
Give me a minute, guys. I just dropped my frickin' Zippo. Aye. Oh, fuck. Got it. Son of a bitch. That was hell. Oh. Sorry about that, guys.
Understand each other, as I had yet to fully master the dialect, but his assumption that I merely had a country accent saved me any uncomfortable questions. I disembarked in the financial center of the city and offered to pay him for the ride with one of my gold slugs. He refused, saying it was far too much for a simple ride, and I offered him a silver slug instead, which he accepted, and offered me a considerable sum of paper currency in the balance, while commenting that he never imagined the country folk had such wealth at their disposal. This metropolis, which I now know to be called the City of Angelic Glory, is easily larger than any city in all the world. I imagine the entire population of England could dwell within, and find themselves wanting for neighbors. There is a great bustle everywhere I go in the city, and yet
Sorry, guys, I thought I heard something.
There is a desperation and fear that underlies it all. Nobody meets anyone's gaze, and every man seems constantly to fear and suspect every other. With the banknotes Mr. Okazem had given me, I breakfasted in a bustling cafe where I enjoyed a meal barely dissimilar from the full breakfast one can find at any reputable establishment in London. And I have found board in a grand hotel named the St. George. Imagine my surprise when I was told my room would be on the 78th floor. An electric lift that would make Mr. Otis green with envy whisked me to the impossible height in seconds, and I found myself staring out a window at the gargantuan city. Towers like the one in which I stood jutted out in all directions, many of them extending hundreds of feet even above my own vantage point. Highways not unlike the one that took me to the city crisscrossed the metropolis and formed a ring around its perimeter, and I beheld a massive network of smaller roads and railways. The hotel concierge has given me directions to the civic library. Tomorrow I shall seek it out, but for now I must close the curtains on this impossible scene and rest, for I find myself overwhelmed and weary. January 11th, 1876. My findings at this city's great library have shed much light into the nature of the world I now find myself in. The library itself stood 12 levels high, not as tall as many of the other buildings in the city of angelic glory, but easily taller than any institution of learning in London. A librarian guided me to the 8th level, where I would find books of history and geography, and I spent the day immersed in study. Though the books are written in strange letters that do not resemble any I have ever seen, I have found somehow that I am able to understand them as if it were common English writing. A comparison of a world map to the one in my own atlas confirmed that I was in...
I'll be right back, guys. Alright, guys. It's going on 30 minutes. It's in the video. I'm gonna continue this in another video. I know things are just starting to get good in this reaction video, but I gotta keep things short. I got shit to do tomorrow. So I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Peace and love.